boy, here we go again. Papa Yam's back on his high horse talking about how young people don't want to ride bikes. Quick, grab your emotional support waifu pillow before I begin. While I may not be old, I am no longer a young whippersnapper either. I am 30 years old now, and what felt like was just a few short years, I have firsthand experienced the transition from a time when young people referred to late millennials who wore flannel and ate avocado toast to now where young people refers to Zoomers who use TikTok dances to explain which vape flavor is the most queer-coded during a Zoom call with their therapist. My point being, cultural shifts are happening faster than ever, but maybe every generation has felt this way. Back in my day, I had to ride my Turbo Busa 200 miles uphill both ways in a snowstorm to get to my day job in the Bitcoin mine. And if things are getting so damn strange, where do motorcycles fall into this bizarre landscape? I understand we're specifically within the motorcycle space right now, but think about the last time you heard anyone mention a motorcycle while outside of your core group of riding friends. You probably can't, can you? Are young people trying to cancel motorcycles or just not ride them at all anymore? Let's find out. Today's video is supported by Rockform. I'll tell you more about their industry-leading motorcycle phone mounts later in the show. First off, we need to establish whether motorcycles are actually becoming less common. In the United States, motorcycle sales have been slowly declining since their peak in 2006. Do you want to know why? The movie Cars was released in 2006 and won the hearts of young people everywhere, who then became more interested in the idea of driving around in an anthropomorphic motor carriage than riding a motorcycle. But truthfully, motorcycle sales have generally declined since the mid-2000s when motorcycling was at its peak in popularity. Then the 2008 financial crisis not only directly slowed the sales of luxury items like motorcycles and collectible Beanie Babies, it also shaped the way in which younger generations perceive their economic future. Young people from privileged upper middle class households were now realizing that prosperity was not a guarantee, and as they grew into adulthood, usually accompanied by tens of thousands of dollars of debt to maintain the status quo of the middle class life in which they were raised, many people were realizing it wouldn't be as easy as it had been for their parents or grandparents. Obviously, everything was cheaper in like the 80s, cars, homes, education, and of course motorcycles. But even in 2000, which was nearly 25 years ago, that makes my brain hurt, the median home price was only 3.5 times the annual average salary for an individual. Whereas today, the median home prices is over 6 times the average annual salary. Not to mention 23 years of inflation. Like, have you seen how much dish soap costs now? It would be cheaper to wash your dishes with crude oil at this point. So in short, if young people want to continue to eat and eventually own a home that is slightly bigger than a 200 square foot tiny house in Portland, Oregon, they have to make more sacrifices than previous generations. Whether that means not having children, never taking a vacation, or not buying a motorcycle. Previous generations could, on a whim, stroll down to the dealership, sit on a wicked 2-stroke Kawasaki, shotgun a beer with the salesman, and rip out of the parking lot with no helmet after getting a $1,500 loan with just $100 down. No longer are the means of entry that easy. Now, while motorcycles and other luxury items, because let's be honest with ourselves, motorcycles are luxury items in America, are becoming harder to justify as wages stagnate and the cost of living increases year after year, it has become more difficult to obtain a motorcycle endorsement. Now look, I am all in favor for more rigorous licensure for motorcyclists. If you haven't seen me on this channel, I really like the way that Europe does their A1, A2 licensing system. But there is a clear correlation between making something harder to obtain and the amount of people who will pursue it. Way back in prehistory, if you had a driver's license, you didn't have to have a separate motorcycle endorsement. Sometime later, motorcycle endorsements became mandatory, but the skills test was much less involved than the present-day MSF course or even DMV road course. I know, kind of hard to believe given that the MSF is kind of ridiculously easy to pass. It's hard to find any proper documents outlining the requirements for a motorcycle endorsement in, say, the 70s or 80s, but from what I could gather based on the musings of some old riders on online forums, the testing was sometimes as casual as riding around a residential neighborhood while being followed by a DMV tester in a car. Others have mentioned some basic cone slaloms, while some older old geezers can't even remember having taken a test at all, which implies the testing was rather inconsequential or they're experiencing symptoms of early dementia. I know the licensing has gotten more complex in Europe as well compared to what it is 40 years ago, and again, I am all for stricter licensing. It might be harder to get more people on motorcycles if they have to have dedicated however many hours to class time and practical training, but it won't do society as a whole any good just to hand out endorsements to anybody who can pass a vision test and pay a $50 fee. Motorcycle manufacturers would be able to sell more bikes initially, but if there is anything to be learned from Harley-Davidson's tenure, it is hard to have long-term profitability if your customer base keeps dying off. The average age of a motorcyclist in the US is 50 years old. I'm gonna say that again and let that really sink into your brains here. The average age of a motorcyclist in the US is 50 years old. That fact alone should imply that young people don't care about bikes as much, at least not as boomers do. That is because motorcycle culture in America was established upon this epic patriotic menage a trois that existed between boomers, Ronald Reagan, and Harley Davidson. And Joe Camel was there too, holding the camera. Harley Davidson was America's motorcycle brand. They were the home team, they helped us defeat the Nazis in World War II, and then bored thrill-seeking soldiers with a modest smattering of PTSD adopted the two-wheeled lifestyle after they came back to America after the war. This became the foundation for motorcycling in America for the next 50 years. What started as a haven for outlaw types on the fringes of society then became a cultural identifier for freedom and individuality. And then when Reagan made Japanese motorcycles prohibitively expensive to purchase in the 80s, Harley really began to thrive. They pumped up their marketing, AMF slapped their logo onto everything from golf carts to Pez dispensers, and motorcycles from HD soon became a status symbol for established middle-class white men on the cusp of an explosive midlife crisis. And even though those Reagan-imposed tariffs on Japanese motorcycles waned by the end of the 80s, Harley had enough time to cement their brand and identity in the motorcycle space. But there was just one problem. Harley didn't have the foresight to think about how sooner or later, diabetes and heart disease would eventually come for their core customer base, and they had done little to nothing to attract younger generations to the brand or motorcycles in general. Now look, if you're a young person watching this video, there's probably a good chance you're watching this on your cell phone. You're probably also on the toilet. I just know that you are. It's okay. And how are you going to keep watching Game and Noob if your phone falls out of your greasy Cheeto fingers and obliterates into a million tiny pieces? Exactly. Luckily, I have the solution for you. Rockform, baby. Rockform is the ideal choice for motorcyclists. Their phone cases are drop tested from 6 feet, so all you short kings in the audience have nothing to worry about. And all of you 5'11 kings too. Once you got the Rockform case, it can seamlessly attach to a Rockform handlebar mount in just seconds. And then you can do all the dank nooners you want and it won't be going anywhere. We've worked with Rockform for a very long time here on the channel, and they're the only phone case and mounting system I would recommend for all motorcyclists. Rockform has cases for every phone and mounts for every single style of bike. Head over to rockform.com and use the code YN25 for 25% off your order. Again, that's YN25 for 25% off your order from Rockform. Thanks so much for the support, Rockform. Now back to the video. For most non-motorcyclists, the perception of motorcycling is limited to either pop culture references like Sons of Anarchy or Tim Allen's Oscar-winning performance in Wild Hogs, or they think of their alcoholic uncle that rides a fat boy and isn't allowed to come to Thanksgiving dinner anymore. While those who are in the motorcycle world know that motorcycles and motorcyclists vary greatly, the cultural perception of motorcycles doesn't do much to incentivize new generations to explore the two-wheeled life. Young people today are far more concerned with things like wellness and nourishing their soul through manifestation and crystal prayer than having any actual fun. Okay, let me rephrase that because there's some data to back this up. Young people today find enrichment in ways that are different than previous generations. In the past, like my past, children spent tons of time outdoors, riding bikes, riding skateboards, getting hurt, breaking into cars, smashing mailboxes, stealing fireworks, smoking darts, and otherwise enjoying varying degrees of felonious behavior. There was generally an air of recklessness that ultimately led to the desire to ride motorcycles. In the 70s and 80s, people lived their lives with far less concern for their personal well-being. People smoked, they drank, cars didn't have seatbelts, and you're expected to know how to read until you were 12. Things were simple and honest. Even as recently as the 90s, you'd throw on a pair of Lee pipes, rock a No Fear t-shirt, and jump a 50cc pit bike over a burning trash pile while Freak on a Leash blared in the boombox. And then these kids would eventually grow up, get their GED, and get a Gixxer 600 in 2005. But now all those kids are either dead or in jail and no one is left to keep buying motorcycles. There's anecdotal evidence that because younger generations are so much more risk averse, there's even declining participation in contact sports like football and hockey for long-term effects from head injuries. Nothing about that avoidance bothers me. I'd rather a young person risk getting hurt on a dirt bike than get a CTE on an ice rink while being screamed at by a middle-aged hockey coach with a god complex. And this bears out in other data sets as well. Young people aren't getting their driver's licenses as much. They're not losing their virginity as often. They're not drinking as much. Overall, their behavior is kind of cooling as they just sit at home and look at their phones. In general, society as a whole and the young people who are a product of it are far more concerned with personal safety. Cars are continuously getting safer and more autonomous. Motorcycles have definitely gotten safer with rider aids and other technology, but they will still be inherently dangerous no matter what. And for certain people, the danger is part of the fun, myself included. There is nothing quite like the primal feeling of evading death as you rip through space-time a continuum at 186 miles per hour. Motorcycle ownership also requires a lot more hands-on maintenance and very basic mechanical understanding. And younger generations are quicker to embrace the work harder, not smarter mentality, which could leave them asking themselves, why would I buy a $12,000 motorcycle just to have to lube the chain myself? In a lot of ways, things are easier than they've ever been before thanks to technology. Self-driving cars are a reality that exists in most metropolitan areas, and the pursuit or attraction to convenience or ease of use is in a lot of ways antithetical to the motorcycling experience. Motorcycles are inherently a lot of work. Riding a motorcycle is a tactile experience that requires a skilled and focused operator. They require the rider to wear specialized gear, they need to be properly maintained on a more urgent schedule, and they require a special license to operate. With the cultural push towards electric vehicles, convenience, and autonomy, motorcycles don't entice many consumers. Young people are programmed differently, with their endorphins programmed from childhood to respond to digital stimuli instead of visceral feelings like speed, risk, and agility. TikTok determines when I laugh, Fortnite determines when I cry, every piece of information the world has ever known exists within a rectangle in my pocket. Why would I risk life and limb on a motorcycle just to feel human? This also coincides with the fact that there's many data points suggesting that there's more and more helicopter parents nowadays who simply try to hover over their kids and protect them from every little inconvenience and despair that life may offer, even if that's going to make them a less complete human being. There are just also more convenient ways of getting around. It used to be advantageous to ride a motorcycle in a city because it was easier to navigate congested areas and easier to park, but nowadays, there's rideshare services, there's rental bikes and e-scooters, there's app-based rental services that are often more convenient for an urban city dweller who occasionally needs to go further than walking, but doesn't have the need to own a car or even an entire motorcycle. I saw an article that talked about how ride-sharing and rental bikes and scooters are a contributing factor for a decline in motorcycle sales in Europe, where small displacement bikes serve as an economical mode of transport rather than extravagant luxury. But listen, it's not all bad for the future of motorcycles, and certainly not if I have anything to say about it. We're trying to get more people excited about them here on this channel. Harley-Davidson might be in the weeds, and an interest in motorcycle racing and subsequently the sale of sport bikes may be on a nearly 20-year decline, but the influx of retro-inspired motorcycles and value-driven motorcycles is attracting a new audience to the industry. Adventure bikes too. For instance, Royal Enfield falls into both categories. Their bikes are stylish and retro looking, but insanely affordable for just about anyone who has an interest in riding. And there's the possibility that as electric vehicles become more commonplace and emissions regulations become stricter, maybe motorcycles will become the motorsports alpha dog if they can sidestep the EV wave, as an internal combustion motorcycle engine has a way smaller carbon footprint than a gas-guzzling muscle car. And hopefully, as we move further into a late capitalist Dali painting of reality, more people will become aware of the humanness motorcycles can make you feel. If we get more people to just feel once the cocktail of chemicals that floods your brain when you whack the throttle wide open, the experience of motorcycling should speak for itself. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you're a young person who rides, what got you hooked? Why do you think we're seeing a declining interest in motorcycling? Will a Zoomer ever truly understand the prowess of a Turbo Busa? Be sure to subscribe so you'll be the first to know when we find out. Fact: as glaciers melt on Denali in Alaska, an estimated 66 tons of feces that was left behind by mountain climbers is thawing as the area comes out of a deep freeze. Goodbye.
Keep watching in